Claire stood by the window, her eyes tracing the quiet horizon outside the nursing home. The early morning fog had settled over the small town, and the peaceful scene seemed to mock the storm that had been brewing in her heart for months. She glanced over at her grandmother, Helen, who sat in her favorite chair, wrapped in a knitted blanket that had seen better days. Helen's hands rested in her lap, fingers curled, as if she were holding on to something intangible, a memory, a secret. Her eyes, though tired, still held a fierce spark that Claire remembered from her childhood. That same spark that made Helen so unbreakable, or so it seemed. But now, as time had slowed Helen's once vigorous spirit, Claire couldn't help but feel the distance between them growing. It wasn't the distance of geography or even time. No, it was something far more painful. It was a silence. A wall that Helen had built around herself, something that only grew stronger as Claire grew older. Claire had always been the dutiful granddaughter, visiting her grandmother every weekend, listening to her stories, and trying to draw out the hidden wisdom in her words. But there were always parts of Helen's past that she avoided speaking about. A certain sadness would cross her face whenever Claire asked about the family's history, their lineage, their origins, or even the old house that was now long gone. Claire never pressed the issue. Helen had earned her silence, she thought. It wasn't until her last visit that the truth began to unravel. A letter, tucked away in the bottom drawer of Helen's nightstand, had caught Claire's attention. It was a letter she'd never seen before. Yellowed paper, a foreign handwriting, and the faint smell of dust in years gone by. When Claire opened the envelope, her hands trembled. The words inside were short but sharp. The inheritance is safe, but not for long. Protect the truth, or it will consume us all. Claire didn't understand. It was written years ago, the ink faded with age, but it was clear now that it wasn't meant for her. This letter belonged to someone else, someone Helen had never mentioned. Her grandmother had always been strong, too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to share her pain. But now, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that her family's history was steeped in something darker than she could have ever imagined. She turned to Helen, her voice a whisper in the silence. "Grandma, what aren't you telling me?" Helen's gaze met hers, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. But no answer came. Just the quiet. Just the unspoken. Claire had always known that Helen carried a weight. But now, she realized, it wasn't just age or grief. It was something more, a secret, buried so deep that it had shaped the woman Claire knew. And it was this secret that had kept Helen distant all these years. What happened in Helen's past that made her so distant from her family? The answer, Claire feared, was about to change everything. Claire stood by the bedside, her fingers brushing against the creased edges of the old envelope. It felt oddly heavier than she had expected, like it carried a secret waiting to spill out. She had found it tucked behind the worn pages of an old family photo album, a place Helen had never let anyone go. The letter was aged, the ink on the front nearly gone, but the name was still legible. For Helen Peterson, to be opened in case of my absence. Claire's heart skipped a beat. Her grandfather's handwriting, she hadn't seen it in years, not since his funeral. He had always been a man of few words, quiet like Helen, but what little he did say carried weight. But what could this letter possibly contain? Why had it been hidden away all these years? Taking a deep breath, Claire carefully opened the envelope, wary of damaging it further. Inside, there was a single sheet of yellowed paper, the words written in familiar looping script. The moment she began to read, she could feel the weight of its contents sinking into her chest. Helen, if you're reading this, I am no longer here to explain, but know that what I leave behind is not just mine. The land we built our lives on, the house we raised our children in, and the legacy of our family, these belong to you. But there are others who will try to take what is rightfully yours. Claire's breath caught. The land, the house, it all suddenly made sense. The inheritance that had been a part of Helen's life, but never fully explained to Clare. The land her grandmother had always kept so carefully, never discussing it, never sharing much about it, except that it had been ours for generations. Now it seemed there was more to it. You will find the will in the old chest, hidden where no one will think to look. It's locked, but the key is in the desk drawer. I've made sure to keep it safe for you. It is time, Helen. Protect what is yours. Trust no one. Claire's hands trembled as she finished reading. The letter spoke of a hidden will, a key, and a legacy that had been buried under the weight of family silence. This wasn't just about land or money. It was about something much deeper. Something that had been kept from her for her entire life. But why? Why had Helen kept this from her? And who else knew about it? Clare could feel the heat of the mystery building around her. She glanced over at her grandmother, who was now asleep in her chair, a faint sigh escaping her lips. Helen had always been quiet, never asking for help, never sharing her burdens. But now, the silence felt like a veil hiding a truth Clare wasn't ready to face. She looked back at the letter, her thoughts racing. The will was hidden. Why had her grandfather written this? What was it about this family history that Helen had kept locked away for so long? Clare rose and walked over to the small wooden desk in the corner of the room. She opened the drawer slowly, as if the key to all her questions would somehow jump out at her. There in the back corner she found it, a small silver key. The one her grandfather had left behind. A wave of unease washed over her as she held the key in her hand. She knew that unlocking the chest would bring her closer to answers, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for what she might uncover. The letter was clear. There were people who would stop at nothing to claim what wasn't theirs. Was it possible that her family had more enemies than friends? Clare closed the drawer with a soft click. She wasn't ready to confront that truth yet, but she knew she couldn't ignore it. Whatever was in that chest, whatever her grandfather had left behind, it was time to find out. But with every passing moment, she felt the weight of her decision. The questions that lingered in her mind. Why had Helen hidden this letter? Who was truly entitled to this legacy? And what would happen if the wrong people found out? Claire's eyes lingered on the key in her hand. Whatever was hidden, whatever had been buried for so long, the truth was about to surface. She just hoped she could handle what it might bring. What is this letter truly about? And why has Helen kept it hidden for so many years? Clare stood in the dimly lit attic, the dust swirling around her as she sifted through the piles of old boxes and forgotten memorabilia. It felt like an endless maze, and yet she couldn't stop herself from searching. Each document she uncovered added weight to the mystery she'd stumbled upon. She had barely scratched the surface with the letter from her grandfather, but it was clear now that the past wasn't as clean-cut as it had seemed. Her family's history was entangled with more than just land. It was about power, money, and the dark shadows that could only be cast by betrayal. Clare pulled out a worn leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and edges frayed. This time it was different. The handwriting inside was unfamiliar, scrawled quickly, almost urgently. As she flipped through the pages, her heart began to race. These weren't just ordinary family notes, these were records of secret meetings, undisclosed deals, and coded messages. I've made my decision. The Petersons must never know. The land is too valuable, and Helen, she's too weak to protect what's rightfully hers. She'll never see it coming. We'll ensure everything goes according to plan. Clare froze, her eyes widening. The words seemed to jump off the page at her. Helen too weak to protect what's hers? The betrayal was as cold as it was calculated. The entries continued, detailing meetings with shady figures, exchanges of cash, and references to a Davis, the name that had surfaced before in the conversation about her mother. The very same Davis who had been involved in the mysterious dealings all those years ago. Her pulse quickened. Could it be that Davis wasn't just a name tied to her mother's disappearance? Was he part of the deeper betrayal her family had suffered? We'll have to keep it all under wraps. The Petersons have a way of trusting the wrong people. Helen won't even know she's been robbed until it's too late. Claire's breath hitched as she read the final entry. The handwriting became more frantic as the pages turned. It was clear now. This wasn't just a matter of stolen inheritance. It was a deliberate campaign to destroy her family from within. She slammed the journal shut, her hands shaking. The truth was starting to emerge, but the more she uncovered, the darker it became. She thought of her grandmother, how Helen had always been so quiet, so reserved. Now Claire understood why. Helen had been the silent victim in a game where the stakes were more than just money. It was about control. Helen had never told Claire about these betrayals, about the dangers that surrounded her family. But now it was clear. Someone in the Peterson family had played a dangerous game of manipulation, one that stretched across generations. A game that involved not only land and wealth, but the very foundation of trust that had held the family together. Claire's thoughts were interrupted by a creak from behind her. She turned sharply, but it was just Walter, his frail body standing in the doorway, leaning on his cane. "You've found it, haven't you?" His voice was soft, yet his eyes were filled with the weight of what he had seen. Claire nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the discovery pressing on her chest. "It's all here. The betrayal. It's all laid out. But what I don't understand, Walter, is why. Why would someone within our family do this?" Walter stepped into the room, his old hands trembling as he took a seat beside her. "Because, my dear, in families like yours, the most dangerous enemies aren't always the ones you can see. Sometimes, the worst betrayals come from the people who should have protected you the most." Claire's eyes flickered back to the journal, the name Davis echoing in her mind. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but there was still so much to uncover. She had always believed that the darkest threats came from outside, from strangers, from the people they couldn't control. But now, it seemed the true threat had always been within. Her blood ran cold as she asked the question that had been haunting her since the moment she uncovered the letter. Who is behind this betrayal? Who could have manipulated Helen like this? Walter's face grew grim, and for the first time, Claire saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. Someone who had everything to gain. Someone who knew how to play the game and keep their hands clean. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The family's deepest enemy hadn't just been a stranger. It had been someone who had always been just within reach. Someone she had trusted her entire life. Who is behind the betrayal, and what did they stand to gain? Claire stood in front of the door, her heart hammering in her chest. Behind it, she knew, was Stephen, the man who had once been the protector of his mother. The man who had promised to look after Helen when no one else could. The man who had played a role in keeping Helen in the dark about her own past, about the family's true history. Claire had always respected Stephen, even when she couldn't understand him. But everything had changed. She had uncovered the truth, the darkness hiding beneath the surface of their family, and now she needed answers. The journal, the letters, everything pointed back to him. He had been the architect of the silence that had trapped Helen in the past. As she knocked on the door, the tension in her shoulders increased. She didn't want to believe what she had read, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Stephen had been involved, and it was time to confront him. When the door opened, Stephen stood before her, He looked different, more frail, more defeated than the man she had remembered. His eyes, once filled with strength, now held only uncertainty. He must have known this day would come. Claire wasn't sure if she was ready to hear the answers, but she knew she had no choice. "Claire," Stephen said, his voice hoarse. "What's this about? What do you need from me?" Claire stepped into the room, her gaze unwavering. "I need you to tell me the truth. I need to understand why you've kept so many secrets from Mom, from us. Why did you let her suffer like this? Why didn't you protect her?" Stephen winced, and for a moment, his face fell into a mask of regret. He motioned for Claire to sit, but she didn't. She stood, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her emotions raging beneath the surface. This was no time for pleasantries. This was time for answers. "Claire, you don't understand," Stephen began, his voice breaking slightly. "I was trying to protect her. From everything. From the truth. From the pain of knowing the things I know." He paused, his eyes flicking to the ground as though the weight of his confession was too much to bear. It wasn't just for her. It was for all of us. Claire's breath caught in her throat. For all of us? By lying to her, by hiding the truth? What kind of protection is that? Stephen looked up at her then, his expression hardening. "You don't know the whole story, Claire. I was a kid when it all went down. I watched as my mother was destroyed by the truth. She was crushed, and I knew if she knew what really happened, if she knew what I had done, she would never recover." Claire's heart sank. She had heard whispers over the years, rumors she had pushed aside, but hearing it from Stephen was different. This wasn't just about protecting Helen, it was about Stephen's own guilt. "What did you do, Stephen?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What could have been so bad that you felt the need to hide it from her?" He ran a hand through his hair, the emotion in his eyes betraying him. "It wasn't my choice. I was forced to be a part of it. Your mother, my sister, she was involved in something much bigger than we ever realized. And when Richard died, when he left that will, it wasn't just about money. There were people, dangerous people who would do anything to keep that will from seeing the light of day. I didn't want to lose my family. I didn't want to lose you. And most of all, I couldn't bear to see what it would do to Mom." Claire felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "So you decided that her pain was worth protecting? You kept her in the dark, kept her from knowing the truth about the inheritance, about everything?" Stephen's face twisted in anguish. "I thought it was the only way. I was trying to keep you all safe. But now I see that I failed her. I failed both of you." Claire took a step forward, the weight of his betrayal pressing heavily on her chest. She had loved Stephen. He had always been there, standing as a pillar in the family. But now, all she could see was the man who had chosen silence over the truth. "You lied to her, and in doing so, you gave her nothing but the illusion of safety. What's worse, Stephen, is that you let me live that same lie. You let me believe everything was okay. All this time I was living in the shadows, and you were too afraid to step into the light and help me find my own truth." He looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "I couldn't, Claire. I couldn't risk losing everything. And most of all, I couldn't lose you. You were my last connection to Mom, to everything I thought we could save." Claire shook her head in disbelief. "And now? What now, Stephen? The truth is out. You can't keep hiding behind these lies anymore. Mom deserves to know who she really is, and I'm not going to let you keep protecting her from it." For the first time, Stephen seemed to realize the full scope of his actions. His expression softened with regret, and he spoke the words Claire had been waiting to hear. "I know, I'm sorry. I should have told her. I should have protected her from the beginning. I just didn't want to break her." Claire paused, staring at the man who had caused so much harm in his attempt to protect his family. She finally spoke, her voice firm. The hardest thing to do, Stephen, is to face the truth. But it's the only thing that will set us free. And now, we have to move forward. We can't change the past, but we can decide how we handle the future. What is Stephen's motive in keeping Helen's truth hidden? Clare sat by Helen's bedside, her fingers gently resting on her grandmother's frail hand. The once vibrant woman, whose stories had filled Clare's childhood with warmth, was now a shadow of her former self, tired, worn, and haunted by secrets that had shaped her entire life. Helen had always been quiet about the past. She'd never talked much about her early years, the land they'd once owned, or the family that had turned its back on her. The few times Clare had asked, Helen would always offer a soft smile and change the subject, as though protecting Clare from the painful memories. But now, the weight of the past was too much to bear, and Clare could see the storm in her grandmother's eyes. "Helen," Clare said softly, "you don't have to tell me everything all at once, but I need to understand. I need to know the truth. About the land, about the will, and about Stephen." Helen closed her eyes, her lips trembling as she fought back the tide of emotion. She seemed to shrink under the weight of Clare's gaze, but when she finally spoke, her voice was steady, though strained. "Clare, my life has been one long lie, and it's not just my burden to carry anymore, it's yours too now." She paused, her fingers tightening around Clare's. "When I married Richard, I thought we had it all. We had a future, a family. But when he passed, everything changed. It was my salvation, but also my curse." Clare's heart raced as she listened intently. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the truth that had eluded her for so long. "What happened to the will?" Clare asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Helen looked out the window, her gaze distant as though seeing a time long past. "Richard had a secret that would have destroyed everything. He had promised me the land, a part of his inheritance, because he knew the history of my family, how we were robbed of everything by those we trusted. When he died, that will should have been my claim to what was rightfully mine. But Stephen, he got involved with the wrong people. He allowed them to manipulate him, to erase the truth. The will was locked away, and they kept it buried." Clare's chest tightened as the weight of Helen's words settled over her. She had known that there were dark secrets in her family, but hearing it from Helen's lips was like a knife to her heart. "But why, Grandma? Why didn't you stop them? Why didn't you fight for what was yours?" Helen's face twisted with regret. "I was afraid that if I spoke out, they would hurt me. They had power, and I had nothing left. And Stephen. I couldn't bear to lose him too. I thought that keeping quiet would protect him. But I was wrong." She turned to Clare, her eyes full of sorrow. "I should have fought for you, for us. But I didn't. And now look where we are." Clare's throat tightened. "You didn't deserve this, Grandma. None of this was your fault." Helen's eyes welled up with tears. "I should have been stronger. I should have protected you from all the pain they caused. And I should have confronted the truth long ago. But I was weak. Now I have nothing left to give you but this truth, Clare. The truth that they stole everything from me. And from you." Clare fought to hold back the tears threatening to spill. "What about Stephen? What about his part in all of this?" Helen's eyes darkened. Stephen was weak too. He didn't have the strength to stand up to them. He was manipulated just like I was. He thought that by hiding the truth he could protect us both. But he was wrong. In the end, he let the betrayal go on for far too long. And now we're both paying for it. Clare felt her world begin to shift. The man she had once looked up to, the man she had trusted, had been part of the conspiracy to steal her family's legacy. The man who had raised her, who had been the pillar of their family, was now revealed as a man who had helped cover up the truth. "How can I trust him now?" Clare whispered, her voice breaking. "How can I ever forgive him?" Helen's grip on Clare's hand tightened. "I don't know if you'll ever forgive him, dear. But you have to understand that the truth is the only thing left for us. It's all we have now." What consequences will Clare face after learning the shocking truth? Clare sat at the kitchen table, the files spread out before her like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite finish. Her mind raced as she read over the documents, wills, property deeds, legal letters, all pointing to a truth she hadn't yet fully grasped. The deeper she dug, the darker the family secrets became. The land her grandmother had once owned, the land that had been stolen from her, was tangled in a web of lies and manipulation. And as Clare pushed further into the shadows, she felt a looming presence, the sense that someone, somewhere, was watching her every move. Her cell phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. No name, just an anonymous number. With a deep breath, she answered. "Clare Peterson," she said, her voice steady, though her pulse quickened. "Stop digging," the voice on the other end said, cold and calculating. "You're getting too close. There are forces at play that you don't understand. Let this go before it's too late." Clare's heart skipped a beat. The voice was muffled, deliberately distorted, but the threat was clear. She gripped the phone tightly, refusing to show fear. "Who is this?" she demanded. There was a long pause. Then the voice replied, its tone dripping with menace. "You'll find out soon enough. But know this, Clare. Every step you take toward the truth is a step closer to your own destruction. You don't know who you're dealing with." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Clare sat there for a moment, staring at the phone as if it might give her some clue to who was behind the call. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was it Stephen? Was it someone else trying to protect the family's dark secrets? Whoever it was, they were willing to go to any lengths to keep her from exposing the truth. She ran a hand through her hair, trying to steady her thoughts. She couldn't let fear control her now. This wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about justice, about reclaiming what was rightfully hers and her grandmother's. The threats, the danger, they couldn't stop her. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message. It was from an unknown email address. "Your pursuit of the truth will cost you. Stop now or face the consequences." Clare felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration of war. She'd been digging into the past, uncovering the lies that had kept her family's story hidden for decades, and now someone wanted her to stop. But who had the power to make these threats? And why was her digging so dangerous? Clare stood up, her fingers trembling as she turned off the phone and stuffed it into her pocket. She couldn't back down now. She wouldn't let anyone intimidate her into silence, not after everything she had uncovered. She had already seen the lengths her family's enemies would go to in order to protect their secrets. But she wasn't afraid. She couldn't afford to be. She paced the room, her mind still racing. The threats were growing more personal, and it was clear that someone powerful was pulling the strings from behind the scenes. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. But she couldn't do this alone. Clare grabbed her jacket and headed for the door. There was only one person who could help her now, the lawyer, Mr. Scott. He had been there for her family before, and he might be the only one who understood the danger they were all in. But she knew that seeking his help wouldn't be easy. It was clear now that whatever forces were at play, they were closer than she thought, and they wouldn't let anyone stand in their way. Who is trying to stop Clare from uncovering the full story, and why? Clare stood in front of the large, imposing door to Kimberly's office, her heart pounding in her chest. The message from the anonymous caller had left her with no choice but to confront the one person she had avoided for so long. Kimberly, her aunt. The woman who had always seemed to hover in the background, but whose presence had been felt in every dark corner of their family's history. Claire had suspected for a while that Kimberly wasn't just a bystander in this mess. But today, her suspicions would finally be confirmed. She had spent countless hours poring over documents, digging through family secrets, and the pieces were finally coming together. The truth was there, hiding in plain sight, and it was time for Claire to expose it. She knocked firmly on the door, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. There was no immediate response. She knocked again, louder this time. The door creaked open slowly, revealing Kimberly, who stood in the doorway with an expression of feigned surprise. "Claire," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. "What brings you here? I thought you'd be focused on other things." Claire couldn't contain the anger rising in her chest. "I know what you've been doing, Kimberly. I know you've been pulling the strings all along. You've been manipulating everyone, including me." Kimberly's smile faltered for just a moment, but it quickly returned, colder now, like the sharp edge of a blade. "Oh, darling," she said, stepping aside to allow Claire to enter. "You think you know everything, don't you? But there's so much more at play here than you could ever understand." Claire walked into the office, the walls adorned with expensive art and lavish furniture. But none of it mattered now. The wealth, the power, the status, it all felt hollow in the face of the truth. Kimberly had built her empire on lies, betrayal, and manipulation. And now, Claire had finally seen through it. "You've been hiding the truth for years," Claire said, her voice trembling with the weight of the words. "You made my grandmother believe she was forgotten, that she was worthless. You tried to bury her legacy, and you've been using her to get what you wanted." Kimberly's eyes flashed with something cold, calculating. She crossed her arms and leaned against the desk, her posture casual, as if she had no fear of the confrontation. "I didn't make anyone believe anything, Claire. Your grandmother's legacy was always meant to stay buried. It's not my fault she's been clinging to a past that no longer serves her." Claire's chest tightened, the words threatening to choke her. "You're the one who's been controlling everything, manipulating the family, keeping the truth locked away. But now it's all coming out. I have the will. I have the evidence. I'm not going to let you get away with this." Kimberly's smile widened, but there was no humor in it, only a cold, calculating resolve. "You really think you can just waltz in here and expose me? You've underestimated me, Claire. I've always been one step ahead. And now, well, now that you've come this far, it's too late. There's nothing you can do to stop me." Claire's eyes narrowed as the realization hit her. Kimberly had already made her move. Whatever plans she had in motion, whatever schemes she had put in place, they were already set in motion. This wasn't just about the land or the inheritance. It was about power. And Kimberly would do anything to hold on to it. "What did you do?" Claire whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. Kimberly laughed softly, her voice like ice. "You'll find out soon enough. But don't think you're going to walk away from this unscathed. You've dug too deep, Claire. You've uncovered things that should have stayed buried." Claire took a step forward, her fists clenched. "You've already lost. You won't win this game." Kimberly's expression shifted, the cold smile replaced by something more dangerous. "You don't know what I'm capable of, do you? I've been patient, waiting for the right moment. But now, with you standing here, now I'm going to finish this." Before Claire could react, Kimberly turned to a hidden drawer in her desk and pulled out a folder, thick with documents. She slid it across the desk, watching Claire's every move. "You think you have the truth? You think this will be enough?" Kimberly's voice was low, menacing. "I've got something far worse than you could ever imagine." Claire picked up the folder, her hands trembling. Inside were photographs, names, and bank statements, everything that pointed back to Kimberly's deepest, most dangerous connections. The people who would stop at nothing to ensure that this family's legacy remained in the shadows. But now, with the truth out in the open, Claire knew that Kimberly's game was far from over. She was dangerous, but Claire wasn't backing down. What will Kimberly do now that she's been exposed, and how far will she go to keep her secrets hidden? The clock seemed to tick louder in the small room where Claire and Helen sat surrounded by documents, old photographs, and legal papers. Helen had finally accepted what was happening, but it wasn't the relief Claire had expected. Instead, there was a new sense of urgency in her grandmother's eyes, a shared understanding that their time was running out. Kimberly's game was far from over. "We need to act fast," Claire said, flipping through the papers, each piece of evidence she uncovered revealing more of the tangled web Kimberly had woven. She reached for her phone and dialed Mr. Scott, their lawyer. "We can't afford to waste any more time. The truth has to come out now." Helen, sitting at the kitchen table, looked out the window with a quiet resolve. "You're right. But be careful, Claire. There's more to this than just Kimberly. She didn't act alone. Someone else is pulling the strings." Claire froze for a moment. She had suspected as much but didn't want to face it. If Kimberly had allies, it could mean that the battle they were fighting was far larger than they ever imagined. They needed more than just legal evidence. They needed to know who else was in on it. "I've already started digging," Claire said. "I'll meet with the lawyer tomorrow, but we need a plan to protect you. Kimberly won't stop until she has what she wants." Helen nodded. "Do you know what you're up against, Claire? What you're willing to risk?" Claire's gaze never left the papers in front of her. The truth was a dangerous thing, and the deeper she dug, the more perilous the situation became. "I have to do this. I won't let her win, not after everything she's taken from us." As Claire prepared for the next day, a text message came through from an unknown number. It was brief and cryptic. "If you keep going, there will be consequences. Don't think you'll walk away from this." Claire stared at the message, feeling the weight of the threat pressing down on her chest. She knew that Kimberly was dangerous, but this was something else. Someone else was involved, and they weren't just trying to stop her. They were trying to make her disappear. She took a deep breath and locked her phone, pushing aside the growing sense of dread. This wasn't the time for fear. This was the time to fight back. The next morning, Claire met with Mr. Scott at his office, a modest, aging building tucked away on a quiet street. The lawyer listened intently as she explained everything: the inheritance, the threats, and the mounting evidence against Kimberly. But as she laid out her plan, Claire noticed a subtle change in Mr. Scott's demeanor. His brows furrowed and he leaned forward in his chair. "This is bigger than we thought, Claire," Mr. Scott said, his voice grave. "Kimberly's not acting alone, and the people behind her are dangerous. We have to be cautious. They'll stop at nothing to protect their interests." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. "Who else is involved, Mr. Scott?" "I can't say for sure yet, but I have a feeling the person we're looking for is someone with far more power than Kimberly. If we expose her now, we may just be scratching the surface of something much deeper." Claire left the meeting with more questions than answers. The sense of urgency had increased tenfold. Whoever was behind this scheme, they had the power to ruin everything. And now they were making it clear they would do whatever it took to silence her. Back at home, Claire shared what she had learned with Helen, who listened quietly, her face a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "They'll try to scare us, Claire," Helen said. "But don't back down. This is your fight now. Fight for me, for Anna, and for all the women whose voices were stolen." Claire nodded, her resolve strengthening. She was ready to do whatever it took to bring the truth to light. But as she sat in silence looking at her grandmother, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. That somewhere, someone knew exactly what they were planning. Who else is involved in Kimberly's twisted scheme? And what will Claire risk to uncover the truth? Claire paced back and forth in the dimly lit living room, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready. Helen sat quietly on the couch, her eyes heavy with the weight of years of silence, betrayal, and unspoken truths. "They're coming," Claire said, her voice tight. "Kimberly's on her way, and this time, we're going to make sure she doesn't get away." Helen's hand trembled slightly as she folded the old photograph in her lap. "I've lived a lifetime of fear, Claire, but I'm not afraid anymore. Not with you by my side." Claire took a deep breath, feeling the strength of her grandmother's words. This wasn't just about exposing Kimberly. It was about freeing their family from the shadow that had loomed over them for decades. The stakes were higher than ever before. If they failed today, they could lose everything. A knock on the door echoed through the house, sending a ripple of tension through Claire's body. She walked to the door, her hand gripping the knob with a mix of determination and dread. When she opened it, there stood Kimberly, dressed in a sleek black suit, her face unreadable, her eyes cold and calculating. "Claire," Kimberly said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I see you've made some progress. I'm impressed. But you should have known better than to challenge me." Claire stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "This ends today, Kimberly. The truth is out, and you can't hide from it anymore." Helen stood up from the couch, her frail body betraying none of the strength that Claire knew had always been there. "You can't steal my life, Kimberly. Not anymore. The land, the will, the lies, it all ends now." Kimberly's smile faltered for just a second, but then it returned, more sinister than before. "You don't understand, Helen, you never did. This is about power, not just some inheritance. And it's mine to control." Claire stepped forward, the adrenaline rushing through her veins. "You'll never control us again. You've already stolen too much. This time we're taking it back." Kimberly's eyes narrowed, her face hardening. "You think you've won? You think you've uncovered all of my secrets? You're wrong. This is bigger than you, bigger than all of you. You'll never be able to destroy what I've built, and I'll make sure you pay for it." Claire's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had come too far to back down now. "You've done enough damage, Kimberly. You manipulated my family, took what wasn't yours, and tried to bury the truth. But we're done being silent. We're done hiding. You're finished." A silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. For a moment, it seemed like time had stopped. Then, without warning, Kimberly's mask cracked, and she lunged forward, her hand reaching for something hidden beneath her jacket. Claire's instincts kicked in, and before Kimberly could make her move, Claire grabbed the nearest object, a vase on the table, and swung it in her direction. The sound of glass shattering echoed through the room, causing Kimberly to stumble backward. "You think you can intimidate me with your threats?" Claire shouted, her voice shaking with fury. "Not anymore. This is where it ends." Kimberly recovered quickly, her eyes flashing with venom. "You have no idea who you're messing with," she hissed. "I'll make sure you regret this." But before the confrontation could escalate further, the sound of sirens grew louder outside. Kimberly's eyes flicked to the window, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered in her expression. The police were coming. Claire had made sure of it. "You're done, Kimberly," Claire said, her voice steady now. "You can run, but you'll never escape the truth. You'll never escape the consequences." Kimberly took a step back, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "You think this is over? You think I'll just let you take everything from me? You don't know me, Claire. I always get what I want. With one last defiant glance, Kimberly turned and stormed out of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving an eerie silence in her wake. Claire collapsed onto the couch beside her grandmother, her heart still pounding in her chest. "It's not over yet, Grandma," she whispered. "But we've made it this far, and we're not backing down now." Helen placed a hand on Claire's, her voice soft but firm. "We've fought for this moment, Claire, and now, together, we'll make sure the truth wins." How will Claire protect her grandmother and ensure justice is served? The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with anticipation as the once quiet battle for Helen's inheritance escalated to its final stages. Claire sat in the front row beside her grandmother, her heart pounding in her chest. The stakes had never been higher. Across the room, Kimberly sat with her lawyer, her posture cold and unyielding, her eyes never leaving the papers in front of her. She had always been the puppet master. Now she was the one in the hot seat. Claire's mind raced as she glanced at the evidence laid out before her. Bank records, the forged documents, video footage, even the testimonies from people who had witnessed Kimberly's manipulation. They had everything they needed. Yet something gnawed at Claire's stomach. Kimberly wasn't just any adversary. She had powerful allies. The kind of allies that money could buy. "We have no choice but to proceed," Mr. Scott, the family lawyer, whispered, his voice barely audible. "We've built a solid case, but we must prepare for her final strike. Kimberly's connections will try to tear this apart," Claire nodded, her fingers tightening around the worn photograph of her mother, Anna, that she had carried with her every day since they uncovered the truth. Anna's memory, her legacy, had to survive this trial. There was too much at stake. Not just the land, not just the inheritance, but everything that had been hidden, buried beneath layers of lies and betrayal. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, signaling the beginning of the most crucial chapter of their fight. "Today, we will hear the closing statements," the judge said, his voice stern and final. "Mr. Scott, you may begin." Claire watched as their lawyer stood, papers in hand, prepared to present the culmination of years of hidden truths. His words were calm, measured, but beneath the surface there was an edge of urgency. "Your Honor, we are here not just to present facts, but to ensure that justice is served, despite the power and money that have tried to obscure it for so long. This isn't just about land, about wealth. This is about legacy. The Peterson name, a name tainted by deceit, finally has a chance to be redeemed." Claire's eyes flicked over to Kimberly, who was sitting with her back straight, her face an unreadable mask. But Claire knew better. Beneath the surface, Kimberly's desperation was starting to show. They were winning. Mrs. Kimberly Martin and her associates have used their influence and wealth to cover up the truth for decades, Mr. Scott continued. But no amount of money can change the fact that Helen Peterson Miller is the rightful heir to her family's legacy. And no amount of intimidation can silence the truth. Kimberly's lawyer stood up, cutting across Mr. Scott's statement. His tone was sharp, slick, perfectly crafted to confuse and distract. "Your Honor, the evidence presented today is nothing but hearsay. A few documents, a grainy video. None of it proves any wrongdoing on Mrs. Martin's part. What we have is an inheritance dispute, a family matter, blown out of proportion by an overzealous grandson and a granddaughter looking for a payout." The lawyer's words hung in the air, laced with a sense of finality, but Claire could see the cracks beginning to show. They were scared. They had reason to be. The truth was closing in, and no amount of polished lies could stop it now. As the final arguments were made, Claire's thoughts drifted to the past, the years of silence, of feeling lost, abandoned by her own blood. She remembered the photo she had found, the letter from her mother that led her to this moment. It was all coming together, every piece falling into place. But now, as they stood on the edge of victory, the question that loomed large in her mind was simple. Would the system protect them? Kimberly had been weaving webs of corruption for years. Connections, lawyers, officials, it was all part of her strategy. The more Claire uncovered, the more she realized that Kimberly's reach extended far beyond the family. She had protected herself with a fortress of money and influence. And now, with the final judgment just hours away, the battle for Helen's legacy felt like it could slip through their fingers at any moment. Claire leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "Grandma, are you okay?" Helen gave her a faint smile, her hand trembling as it rested on the table. "I'm fine, child. The truth is finally being told, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I've done something right. No matter what happens, we've already won." Claire's heart swelled with pride as she looked at her grandmother. This wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about the strength to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. The judge turned to address the courtroom. "I've heard all the arguments, and I will take them into consideration. However, there is one thing I will not overlook. The law must be upheld. No amount of wealth, no amount of influence can change that." The room fell silent. The final decision was imminent, and in that moment, Claire realized how much more there was to this story. The fight had just begun. Even if they won today, there would be no peace until every last secret was revealed, every last guilty party held accountable. Claire met Kimberly's gaze across the courtroom, the final, bitter truth hanging between them. Kimberly's eyes burned with rage, but Claire didn't flinch. This battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. The final move had yet to be played, and Claire was ready for whatever came next. Will the legal system protect Helen's legacy, or will Kimberly's money and connections win? The courtroom felt colder than ever. The familiar hum of anxious murmurs had faded into an oppressive silence. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the final judgment. Claire sat at the front, her grandmother Helen beside her, both their hands trembling ever so slightly. Months of relentless pressure, deceit, and threats had brought them to this day, this one final moment when everything would be decided. Claire's mind replayed every obstacle they had faced. The discovery of the hidden will, the forged documents, the threats, the lies that had tainted every part of their lives. For years, Helen had lived in fear and silence, trapped in a world where her own blood had turned against her. But now here they were. Finally, justice was within reach. Kimberly sat across the room, her once pristine appearance now marred by the strain of the trial. She was no longer the confident, calculating woman who had manipulated her way to the top. Her expression was tight, and her eyes darted nervously between the lawyers and the gallery. She knew the end was near, but did she know the full cost? The judge entered, his footsteps deliberate, and the room stood in respect. His gavel struck the wood with authority, and the proceedings began. Claire's heart pounded in her chest. This was the moment of truth. After months of deliberation and review of all the evidence, this court will now render its decision, the judge said, his voice steady and resolute. He turned his gaze to Kimberly, who sat rigidly in the defendant's seat. "Mrs. Kimberly Martin, you stand accused of multiple crimes, aggravated abandonment, forgery, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The evidence against you is clear, and there is no question as to your involvement in the manipulation of family records and the theft of Helen Peterson Miller's inheritance." Kimberly's lips tightened, but she didn't speak. She could no longer hide behind her carefully crafted persona. It was over. Claire's eyes shifted to her grandmother. Helen, despite her frailty, was sitting upright, her face set with determination. She had already suffered so much at Kimberly's hands. This final confrontation was only a formality. The damage had already been done. But now, it was all about whether the world would ever recognize her truth. The judge continued. The legal and emotional damage caused by these actions cannot be understated. However, the law must be upheld. After considering all the testimonies, the documentary evidence, and the consequences of these crimes, this court has reached its verdict. Kimberly's lawyer stood, trying to interrupt. Your Honor, we request leniency. Mrs. Martin is the product of a broken family. She acted out of fear and necessity. The judge raised his hand, cutting him off. This is not about leniency. This is about accountability. And justice. Claire felt her throat tighten. The words she had been waiting to hear were so close, yet the weight of the moment was overwhelming. Her life, her grandmother's life, everything they had fought for was hanging in the balance. Kimberly Martin, the judge continued, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for your role in these crimes, with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. Claire's breath caught. The words were like a hammer falling, a final reckoning for everything Kimberly had done. But even as she exhaled in relief, she knew the battle hadn't been won without a cost. The damage to their family, the years of silence, the pain, they would carry that burden forever. Kimberly didn't speak, but her eyes met Claire's for the first time. There was no remorse in them, only defiance. She had been defeated, but her bitterness still clung to her like a shadow. As the guards moved to take Kimberly into custody, the tension in the room slowly began to dissipate. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that despite the victory, something was missing. The judge looked to Helen and Claire, offering a brief nod. The legacy is yours, Mrs. Peterson Miller, as it always should have been. Justice has been served in the court of law, if not in the court of history. Claire took her grandmother's hand and stood, the weight of the moment finally hitting her. It was over. They had won, but it had cost them more than they could ever repay. What will be the true cost of seeking justice? The courthouse was now a distant memory, and so was the storm of emotions that had consumed Claire and her family. The trial was over, and justice had been served, or so they thought. Claire sat quietly beside her grandmother in the peaceful garden behind their home, the sun casting a warm glow on the world that had seemed so dark just weeks before. But even as Helen rested her weary hands on her lap, a deep, unspoken tension hung in the air. They had won the battle, but the scars of betrayal were not so easily erased. Claire squeezed her grandmother's hand, a silent promise that no matter the outcome, they would rebuild what had been shattered. Helen, now free from the chains of her past, looked out at the garden, her thoughts miles away. You know, she began, her voice soft, I always thought justice would bring peace. But I was wrong. Claire glanced at her, her heart aching at the weight of her words. Helen turned toward her. I thought that once the truth was out there, I could finally breathe again. But every time I close my eyes, I see everything we lost. The years, the memories stolen, the love never given. Claire felt the weight of those words. She had fought for this moment, for her grandmother's dignity, for the truth. But the reality of it all, how long they had both suffered in silence, was beginning to settle in. The redemption they had sought had come at a great cost. Helen's suffering was not just about the inheritance. It was about lost time, broken bonds, and the toll betrayal had taken on her spirit. A shadow passed across the garden, and Claire noticed Stephen approaching, his eyes full of guilt and regret. He had come to terms with his role in the past, But forgiveness was not something that could be given overnight. He had betrayed his mother, and now he faced the daunting task of proving that he could be something more than the man who had stood by and watched. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, standing a few feet away from them, his hands in his pockets. "I don't know how to make this right." Claire met his gaze. Her anger toward him had subsided over time, replaced by a weariness she couldn't explain. She had no answer for him, not yet. "You can't undo what you did, Stephen, but you can start by being honest. With us. With yourself." Helen nodded, her voice gentle but firm. "We'll never be the same, Stephen. We can't go back to what was lost. But maybe we can move forward together." There was a long silence before Stephen finally spoke. "I want to try. I want to be here for you, for both of you. I've wasted so many years." Claire watched her uncle as he spoke, his remorse raw and real. She didn't know if she could forgive him yet, but she did know that healing was a slow process. They could never erase the damage done, but they could take steps toward rebuilding. One day at a time. Helen stood, her legs stiff but her resolve stronger than ever. "It's time to move on, not from what happened, but with it. We can't change the past, but we can shape the future." Claire stood beside her, offering a small but determined smile. "We're not alone in this anymore, Grandma." How will the family move forward after everything they've been through? If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. Have you ever had to confront a truth about your family? What did you learn about yourself and your loved ones in the process? We'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment and let's talk about the power of family secrets, betrayal, and healing. If you haven't yet, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more emotional and dramatic family sagas like this one. We're just getting started, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay tuned for the next chapter as we continue to explore stories of redemption, forgiveness, and the truth that binds us all.